It started with a letter, just a piece of paper slipped into my mailbox. But that routine notice from the HOA? It was never just paperwork. It was the first move in a quiet war, one where greedy hands thought they could steal the land. My family built with sweat and memory. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I was just some old man on a rocking chair. What they didn't know was that I had no intention of going quietly. What followed was a fight for legacy, truth, and justice. And let me tell you, the ending. You won't see it coming. Let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. I'd love to know who's walking this trail with me. I always knew peace was temporary in Ridge Hollow, but I didn't expect war to begin at my mailbox. It was a crisp Monday morning in late September, the kind of day where the mountain air feels like it's cleaning your lungs. I was sipping my coffee, enjoying the rustle of aspen leaves from my front porch, when I saw the envelope. White, thick paper, gold seal, Ridge Hollow HOA. My gut twisted. HOA letters were never good news. I tore it open with a weathered thumb and began reading. I didn't even make it past the second line before my coffee turned to acid in my gut. Dear Mr. Whitman, after a boundary correction by certified land surveyors, your lower pasture has been reclassified as community recreational space, effective immediately. I read it again, then a third time. Reclassified? That was my land, 5 acres of soft slope, wildflowers in spring, the same soil where my father taught me how to plant tomatoes, the same stretch where I proposed to my late wife under a meteor shower. It had been in my family for nearly a century. My grandfather built his first cabin on that land in 1934, back when Ridge Hollow was just a logging town with dirt roads and 4 last names. And now, some paperwork was telling me that stretch of family memory was no longer mine. I walked inside, dropped the letter on the counter, and stared out the kitchen window at the lower pasture. The autumn sun gave it a golden hue. The aspens swayed gently, like they hadn't heard the news yet. The HOA had been getting bolder since Margaret Delaney took over as president earlier that summer. She was sharp, well-dressed, and always smelled like lilacs. The kind of woman who could smile while gutting you with a butter knife. I pulled out the folder with our land records deeds, tax statements, survey reports. Everything was in order. I had paid taxes on that land for over 40 years. No one had said a damn thing about reclassification until now. By 10:15, I was knocking on Margaret's front door. Her chalet sat higher up on the ridge, all glass and angles. A Tesla was charging in the driveway. The flower beds were obnoxiously symmetrical, and not a single leaf dared to fall on her stone path. When she opened the door, she was in yoga pants, hair perfect, holding a cucumber smoothie. "Carl," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "What a surprise." I held up the letter. "Is this a joke?" She tilted her head, then gestured for me to follow her onto her porch. Not a joke, just a boundary update. The new survey from Warren and Keene showed some inconsistencies with old hand-drawn maps, so the board voted to update things accordingly. I tried to keep my voice level. "Without telling me?" She sipped her smoothie. "The bylaws don't require notification for adjustments to common property. We're building a community wellness center down there, pool, tennis courts, a walking trail. It'll raise property values across the board. Except mine, since you're stealing it." Her lips thinned. "Let's not use inflammatory language. I've paid taxes on that land since 1980. Tax records aren't legal proof of ownership," she said with a shrug. "The new lines are recorded with the county. You're welcome to dispute it legally, of course." That was the thing. Margaret didn't flinch when she lied, didn't even blink. I turned to leave, rage boiling under my skin. Just as I hit the stone path, I heard laughter from behind the trees. Peering through, I saw Grant and Kelsey Brooks, my new neighbors, standing by a fire pit. They'd built suspiciously close to my old fence line. A portable speaker thumped out soft rock as they clinked wine glasses. Kelsey saw me watching and gave a little wave. I didn't wave back. Back home, I took the long route around the pasture. There, freshly planted in the middle of my damn property, was a wooden stake with pink tape fluttering in the breeze. HOA boundary, do not remove. I kicked it. Not hard enough to knock it over, but enough to make myself feel better. I spent the rest of the day digging through old records. I called the county clerk, but they were vague. New surveys override old informal maps, they said. You'd need something concrete to contest it. Something concrete. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying every memory tied to that land. My dad chasing me through the aspens with a garden hose. My wife reading under the oak tree, hair backlit by sunlight. My son's first steps right near the spot where the stake now stood. Around 3 a.m., I pulled out the old shoebox from the hallway closet. Inside were things my father left behind when he passed dog tags from Korea, faded photos, and a folded piece of paper wrapped in plastic. A map. Not a map of Ridge Hollow today, but of what it used to be. Streams, rocks, even an old well that had since been buried. My father's notes were scribbled in the margins in pencil. Creek bends west. Boundary marker near Big Rock. I stared at the map for a long time, then pulled out my phone and scrolled to the last contact. I ever thought I'd use Hank Sellers. Hank, I said when he picked up, his voice groggy. You still got your old survey gear? There was a pause, then a grunt. Depends. You digging up trouble? No, I said. Trouble's already here. I'm digging up the truth. By sunrise, I was already out of the house, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and my father's old map tucked under my arm like a lifeline. Ridge Hollow might have gotten a fresh coat of paint over the years, new fences, glossy homes, and HOA signs on every mailbox, but the land itself remembered, and I was betting my future on that memory. I pulled up to Hank's place at the edge of town, just as he was dragging an old duffel bag out of his garage. His gray hair stuck out from under a sweat-stained ball cap that read, "Don't tread on me," and he still had that permanent squint from decades of working under the sun. You weren't kidding, he muttered, slinging the bag into the back of his truck. Trouble already on your doorstep. I handed him the map. He whistled low. This is your dad's. I haven't seen one of these in 40 years. Where'd you dig it up? Back of the closet, I said. Found it last night after that letter showed up. I paused, the anger creeping back in. They're claiming the pasture. Margaret's calling it community recreational space now. Says a new survey backs her up. Hank's jaw tightened. Warren and Keene, right? I nodded. Figures. Those pencil pushers are in bed with half the hoe, as in this county. They corrected my sister's property line last spring, took 10 feet off her garden, and handed it to the new couple next door right before they built a gazebo. He opened the map across the tailgate of his pickup. Your old man did it the smart way, used what doesn't change. Creek bends, old ridges, boulders that been there for centuries. Can we still find the markers? I asked. Hank looked at me over his reading glasses. Depends if no one's covered them up on purpose. But I'll tell you what, Carl. If those rods are still in the ground, and they say what you think they do, Margaret's not just stealing land. She's stealing history. We loaded the gear metal detector, GPS unit, a battered level, fluorescent flags, and a toolkit that looked like it belonged in a museum. As we drove down to my property, the morning mist clung to the ground like a secret. We started near the old oak, what we always called Dad's tree. My father used to set up a folding chair under it every fall and read with a thermos of hot cider. It was also where he once told me, never trust a man who calls your land negotiable. Hank swept the detector back and forth in slow, steady arcs. 10 minutes passed in silence, just the soft clicks and beeps of the machine. Then, ping. He dropped to his knees and dug carefully into the earth. There it was, rusted iron, about the length of a pencil. First one, he said, grinning. Over the next 2 hours, we found 3 more. Each one matched up perfectly with my dad's original sketches, and each one pushed the property line well beyond the pink tape. The HOA had staked sometimes by 20, even 30 feet. Then we hit the ridge. You see that rock? Hank asked, pointing to a broad slab jutting out of the ground like the spine of the earth. Your dad marked this as the corner. used to be called Widow's Stone. I remember climbing it as a kid, pretended it was a pirate ship. He crouched down and brushed at the dirt near the base. Something hard glinted in the soil. "Careful," he said, as I knelt beside him. We unearthed a small shard of pottery, faded red patterns spiraling across its surface. My pulse jumped. Another shard, then a small chipped arrowhead. "Are these?" I started. Hank nodded slowly. "Could be native. Possibly older than anything else on this ridge." I sat back on my heels, holding the arrowhead between my fingers. My grandfather used to tell stories about digging up relics in the pasture when he was a boy. I always figured they were just tall tales. Turns out he wasn't lying. "If this spot's confirmed as archaeological," Hank said, "the state can issue a historical preservation freeze. That means no building, no digging, no luxury spa." We both stared at the ridge in silence. "You sure you want to poke this bear?" he asked finally. "She already poked me," I replied. "I'm just not rolling over." We flagged each marker, took photos, and carefully bagged the artifacts. I'd need an official archaeological evaluation, but this was a start, a strong one. By the time we got back to my house, my boots were soaked through and my thermos was empty, but my adrenaline was still going strong. That's when my phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. "HOA crew arriving Tuesday. Clear any personal property construction begins." It was Friday morning. At 4 days. That's all I had to stop a bulldozer from tearing up everything my family built. As we parked, I saw Grant and Kelsey on their patio, laughing over mimosas. A bright orange HOA flyer was taped to their fence, announcing, "Pine Ridge Wellness Center coming soon." They waved again. I didn't wave back. Inside, I spread Hank's survey sketches across my dining table, laid out next to the old family deed, the photos, and my dad's dusty map. In the middle of the mess sat that tiny arrowhead, like a warning from the past. Margaret thought she could take this from me. She thought I'd go quiet. She had no idea that I'd spent my whole life preparing for a fight like this, even if I didn't know it. Saturday morning brought a sharp wind and a sharper purpose. I didn't waste time with toast or eggs. I brewed a thermos of black coffee, grabbed my folder of documents, and drove straight to the county recorder's office. The receptionist, a 20-something kid with a man bun and earbuds, looked up lazily when I entered. "Need help with property forms?" "I need historical survey records," I said. "From the 1940s. Parcel hashtag 298C. He blinked, then typed with 2 fingers. "You'll need archival access downstairs, room 3C. If it's not digitized, you'll have to go old school." Room 3C smelled like old paper and forgotten arguments. Rows of steel filing cabinets lined the walls. I found the one labeled 1940-1949 and started digging. After half an hour, my hands were covered in dust, and my back was screaming. But I found it, survey record hashtag 298C, signed March 1941. My name, or rather, my grandfather's, was right there. The lines matched Hank's markers exactly. Better yet, the survey had a note attached. "This parcel includes Southern Ridge area noted in 1939 geological report for possible indigenous activity. Flagged for historical review if disturbed." I took a photo with my phone and carefully returned everything. As I left, I texted Hank. Confirmed. Official 1941 survey mentions site as possible historic. We've got a leg to stand on. Then I called the County Historical Preservation Board. The woman who answered, Jeanette, had the voice of someone who drank tea out of porcelain cups and took land boundaries very seriously. "You're saying you found archaeological material on private property?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Pottery, possibly indigenous. And we found 4 original survey markers contradicting a recent HOA map." Jeanette didn't hesitate. "If you submit Form H-17 by Monday with photographic evidence, we can file for an emergency hold on any construction until a site review is completed." "How long does that take?" "Depends. Sometimes a few weeks. But if anything's found, the land becomes subject to state preservation law. No HOA or developer can touch it. I thanked her and hung up, heart pounding. I had a shot. By the time I got home, there were 3 HOA flyers taped to my mailbox, all neon green. One was about a neighborhood celebration next Friday coincidentally, right when the bulldozers were scheduled to arrive. I didn't bother reading the rest. I spent the afternoon putting together my preservation request photos of the survey markers, copies of my grandfather's map, notes from Hank, close-ups of the arrowhead and pottery shards. I scanned everything, labeled it by hand, and filled out every line of Form H-17 like I was filing for battle. Around 5:30, I saw a familiar figure walking up my driveway. Edith Miller cardigan, loafers, and holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "I figured you weren't eating right with all this going on," she said. "Meatloaf and mashed potatoes." I almost cried on the spot. She followed me inside, sat at my kitchen table, and listened as I laid it all out, the land grab, the phony survey, the artifacts. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You know, I taught history for 41 years, Carl. I still do a bit of work for the museum downtown. If you need a witness or someone to validate what you found, I'm happy to help. I might take you up on that." Before she left, she gave my shoulder a squeeze. "You're not fighting alone. A lot of us have been quiet too long. It's time someone stood up to Margaret." Later that evening, I walked out back. The wind had died down, and the stars were starting to show. I stood by Dad's tree, thinking about him, about my grandfather, about the years we spent fishing down by the creek. They now claimed wasn't mine. I wasn't just fighting for dirt. I was fighting for every memory buried beneath it. As I stood in the quiet, I heard voices from the Brooks patio again. Laughter, the clink of glasses. They had string lights up now, draped across the back like it was some kind of resort lounge. Part of me wanted to storm over and rip them down, but another part knew that wasn't the way. Let them laugh. Let them toast. Let them keep thinking they'd won. They had no idea that I'd spent the entire day quietly loading the first shell into the cannon. That night, as I went over the documents again in the soft light of my kitchen, a thought struck me. If Margaret was bold enough to push this survey through and schedule construction so quickly, what else had she done? Who was helping her behind the scenes? I opened my laptop and searched the county's online records. Property transfers, building permits, development plans. It took a while, but I found something curious. An LLC called Hollow Creek Ventures had recently purchased the empty lot just west of my property. 2 names were attached, a James Delaney and a Margaret R. Delaney, her husband. They were planning more than a pool and tennis courts. This was bigger, much bigger, and now I knew exactly where to aim. Sunday started cold and stayed that way. I woke up early, still riding the adrenaline from the day before, and immediately got to work. While the rest of Ridge Hollow enjoyed their Sunday brunches and church services, I was printing photos, organizing documents, and drafting a letter to the county board outlining everything, every marker, every inconsistency, every artifact, and every name involved, including Margaret's. By 10 a.m., I was on my second cup of coffee and my third round of edits when my phone buzzed. It was Hank. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always. Meet me out at the ridge. Bring that arrowhead." The wind had picked up by the time I arrived, sending dry leaves dancing across the field. Hank was already out there, kneeling near the 3rd marker we'd uncovered. He had a visitor, an older woman in hiking boots, and a forest green jacket with the state seal on the sleeve. "Carl," Hank said, standing. "This is Dr. Lillian Sutter. She's an archaeologist with the State Historical Office." Dr. Sutter shook my hand with a firm grip and a sharp look. I was already in the region for a site review in Boone County. Hank called in a favor. I handed her the arrowhead, and her eyes lit up. "This design, this paint looks Caddoan, possibly 700 to 800 years old. Where did you find this?" I pointed to the base of the rock we'd called Widow's Stone since I was a boy. Right there, about 6 inches under the surface. She pulled out her tablet and started taking notes, then paced the area slowly, scanning with a practiced eye. She paused, reached down, and picked up a small fragment half buried in the dirt. This is part of a rim from a storage vessel, definitely handcrafted. And not modern. My heart thudded in my chest. "I'll file a preliminary report by Tuesday," she said. "It should be enough to place a temporary hold on any construction within a 200-foot radius. If further excavation turns up more, it could trigger a full designation. How long would that last?" I asked. "Indefinitely." She left shortly after, promising to follow up with the county board. Hank clapped me on the back as we watched her SUV disappear over the ridge. "You just bought yourself some time," he said. But I knew time wasn't the same as safety. Margaret wouldn't go down quietly. When I got back to the house, I opened my laptop and logged into the county's development portal. I wanted to know more about Hollow Creek Ventures, the LLC that Margaret and her husband had set up. The public records didn't show much of PO Box. A few boilerplate filings, but something else caught my eye. A recent permit application for a road extension cutting through my lower pasture, and another zoning adjustment request, filed just 2 weeks ago. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about a pool. It wasn't even about community recreation. It was a land grab, pure and simple. My pasture was the last piece they needed for a private resort. Vacation rentals, weekend retreats, big money. I printed out every document I could find and stapled them into a folder. That night, I invited Edith over again. She brought apple pie and a folder of her own news clippings, old HOA meeting notes, even a photo of my grandfather and her at the original boundary marker, with a county official, dated 1973. We spread everything out across the dining room table like generals plotting a counterattack. "They tried something similar in '89, Edith said, tapping a newspaper article. "Tried to rezone the Henderson land. Said it was unused and better suited for multifamily development. Sound familiar?" I nodded grimly. "How'd they stop it?" "Your grandmother and I organized a petition, got over 100 signatures in 2 days, called in the county commissioner, exposed the deal, shut it down cold." I sat back, staring at the evidence we'd collected. Think people would still sign something like that? Edith gave me a wry smile. "They would if you asked them face to face. Folks around here respect you, Carl. You're not just some crank with a grudge. You've been here. You fought fires here. Helped during the flood of '97. That means something." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about what was coming: the construction crews, the vote, the legal tricks. But I also thought about my dad and granddad, about the feel of their calloused hands when they worked this land, about the stories they passed down like heirlooms. I couldn't let that be paved over. Monday morning, I put on my best flannel, grabbed both folders, and walked door to door through Ridge Hollow. Some folks weren't home. Some listened politely and shut the door. But many more than I expected invited me in. They remembered the old days. They remembered my family. And most of all, they remembered what it felt like before the HOA started acting like a private government. By noon, I had 47 signatures. By evening, 89. And tucked between them was a short note from one neighbor I barely knew. "Thank you for standing up." I thought we had no say anymore. That night, I stood by the edge of the pasture with Edith and Hank as the sun set behind the ridge. The air was still, but the ground felt alive beneath my boots. "They're not going to give up," Hank said quietly. "I know," I replied. But now, I looked at the folders in my arms. Neither am I. As we walked back toward the house, Edith chuckled to herself. "You know what your grandfather used to say every time the HOA tried something shady? What's that? Give 'em enough rope, and they'll hang themselves. Just don't forget to tie the knot." I smiled for the first time that day. The knot was already halfway done. Tuesday arrived like a hammer, loud, heavy, and impossible to ignore. At 6:42 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of engines. Not one, not two, but an entire convoy. I scrambled to the window and felt my stomach turn. A bulldozer, 2 flatbeds with cement mixers, pickup trucks with logos I didn't recognize, all crawling down Ridge Hollow Road toward my pasture like they owned it. I pulled on jeans and boots, grabbed my phone and folder, and made it outside just in time to see the lead contractor jump down from his truck. A man in his early 50s wearing a neon vest, sunglasses, and a clipboard thicker than a phone book. "You, the property owner?" he asked without looking at me. "I'm Carl Whitman," I said. "That's my land you're about to roll over," he frowned. "According to the HOA's plan, this is designated for community development. We've got paperwork authorizing foundation work today." "You've got paperwork," I said, holding up my own folder, "based on a fraudulent survey." Before he could respond, another car pulled in fast behind us. A sheriff's deputy. Thank God. Deputy Hall stepped out, adjusting his belt and blinking against the rising sun. I knew him young, respectful, smart enough not to take sides too quickly. "Morning, folks. Got a report of a disturbance?" "I called," I said quickly. "They're trying to break ground on a legal dispute. This land is under review by the State Historical Office. I have paperwork to prove it." I handed over a copy of the Form H-17 submission, along with the archaeologist's preliminary report. Hall took his time reading it. "Is this legit?" the contractor asked, clearly annoyed. "According to this," Hall said slowly, "any excavation must be paused pending further evaluation. That includes grading or digging." A moment of silence. Then the contractor muttered something about calling his boss and walked away. But the convoy didn't leave. They just sat there, idling. That's when Margaret arrived. Her Lexus slid into my gravel driveway like a shark into shallow water. She stepped out in a perfectly tailored navy suit, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. "Carl," she said with tight-lipped civility, "you're creating quite a mess. I'm protecting what's mine." She turned to Deputy Hall. "We're within our rights. The survey is filed. The board approved the development." "The development," I said, stepping forward, "that just so happens to benefit your husband's LLC." That got her attention. The smirk faltered. "You're making baseless accusations," she said sharply. "I've got permit applications, zoning requests, and land purchase records all tied to Hollow Creek Ventures. Shall I keep going?" Deputy Hall looked increasingly uncomfortable. "MAAM, if there's a legal dispute underway, I suggest you contact your attorney and halt operations until it's resolved." Her nostrils flared. "You're going to regret this, Carl." I took a step closer. "The only thing I regret is not calling you out sooner." Margaret turned on her heel, barked something at the contractor, and stormed off. The trucks slowly backed out, one by one, their tires crunching the gravel in retreat. But I knew this wasn't over. Later that morning, I got an email from the HOA board secretary. "Emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Wednesday, 7 a.m., Community Center. Agenda: enforcement review, special motions." That was code for one thing: retaliation. I spent the rest of the day prepping. I went back through every email I'd received from the HOA in the past 6 months. I flagged anything suspicious. Early mentions of reclassification, private meetings I'd never been invited to, edits to bylaws that hadn't been publicly announced. I highlighted the HOA rule that required 72-hour notice for special meetings. They'd just violated it. I printed everything. 3 copies. Then I called Hank and Edith. "We're going in tomorrow," I said. All the way. That night, I could barely sleep. Every noise outside felt like an ambush. Every shadow looked like a trick. At 4:00 a.m., I made coffee, loaded my truck, and put on my good boots. If they wanted a show, they were about to get one. When I pulled into the Ridge Hollow Community Center parking lot at 6:45, I wasn't alone. Hank was there in his faded Carhartt jacket, thermos in hand. Edith stood beside him, holding a canvas bag filled with old meeting minutes and press clippings. By 7:05, the room was nearly full. Margaret stood at the front, flanked by Tyler Morgan and two other board members who looked like they hadn't slept either. "Let's come to order," she said, banging her gavel. But I stood up before she could continue. "Point of order," I said, holding up my folder. "This meeting violates HOA bylaws. No proper notice was given." Murmurs filled the room. A few heads nodded. Margaret frowned. "This is an emergency session." "Emergency sessions still require 72-hour notice," I said. "And you gave us less than 24. Edith stepped forward. "I helped write those bylaws in 1991. "He's right." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. One of the board members leaned over and whispered something to Margaret. She ignored him. "Regardless," she pressed on, "we're here to vote on a motion to censure Mr. Whitman for obstruction of approved development." I laughed. "You mean I stopped you from bulldozing a historic site?" I walked to the front and laid out my documents on the table. "This land," I said, "has been in my family for 3 generations. The current survey is fraudulent. The markers were manipulated. And the development you're so eager to push through? It personally benefits you and your husband." Gasps. "Real ones this time." I pulled out the final piece, a printed zoning map showing the resort overlay plan submitted under Hollow Creek Ventures. The new road, the private cabins, the spa, and right at the center, my pasture. "You lied," someone whispered. Margaret's face went pale. I looked around the room. "We're neighbors. We've mowed each other's lawns, helped in snowstorms, raised our kids on these streets. Are we really going to let one person sell that out for profit?" The silence that followed was louder than any speech. Margaret tried to speak, but the board secretary beat her to it. I motioned to postpone all votes until legal counsel is present. Seconded, someone called from the crowd. "All in favor?" A sea of hands went up. I stepped back, heart pounding. This wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur. I spent most of it on the phone first with Jeanette from the State Historical Office, who confirmed they'd filed the temporary hold on all construction on my land, and then with Vince, my cousin, at the county recorder's office. "You were right," Vince said. "Hollow Creek Ventures is a shell company. Margaret's husband is listed as CFO, and the CEO is some dummy name used on 24 other development projects across the state. Most of them, well, they don't end well for the original landowners." I felt a cold weight settle in my gut. "Can you send me what you have? It's coming your way." By the time I printed it all, my kitchen table looked like a crime scene. Wall names, dates, permit numbers, arrows drawn in red pen. I wasn't just fighting an overzealous HOA. I was fighting a coordinated land-flipping scheme. That evening, I walked across the street to see Edith. She was in her backyard garden, trimming dead leaves off her marigolds. "They'll come after you harder now," she said without turning. "You embarrassed Margaret in front of everyone." "I didn't do it to embarrass her. I did it to stop her. She won't see the difference." She straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at me with that same calm steel she always carried. "You need to be ready for what comes next." "What do you mean?" "She'll try to divide the neighborhood, undermine your credibility, maybe even bring in lawyers to scare people into silence." I looked down at my boots. "You think they'll fall for it?" "Some already have." She nodded toward the Morgan house. I turned just in time to see Tyler standing on his porch, talking to someone on the phone. He glanced in our direction, then quickly stepped inside. "People don't like conflict," Edith said. "They'd rather pretend the noise isn't there. But when you force them to listen, they'll either stand with you or turn away." That night, I updated the petition and started drafting a neighborhood newsletter. Not a rant, not a manifesto, just the truth. I laid out the facts, the false survey, the archaeological findings, the development scheme. I attached photos, documents, everything the HOA didn't want anyone to see. On Thursday morning, I printed 100 copies and walked house to house again. Some folks were wary, asking if I was trying to start a rebellion. Others offered coffee and stories of how the HOA had fined them for things like mailbox paint and wind chimes. One woman in her 70s pulled me aside and said, "I've lived here 28 years, Carl. This place used to feel like a neighborhood. Now it feels like a gated plantation." By lunchtime, word had spread. By sunset, Margaret's silence had cracked. She sent out an official HOA bulletin accusing certain individuals of misleading the community and jeopardizing a project that would benefit all residents. She warned of legal consequences for slander and obstruction, but it was too late. That evening, a knock came at my door. It was Tyler Morgan. He looked tired. Not just physically, something in his shoulders had changed. Softer, maybe. Or just heavier. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in, and he sat at my kitchen table like a man on trial. "You were right," he said, "about the LLC, about Margaret's plan. I didn't know at first, but Samantha overheard her on a call last week. They're planning luxury rentals. Not for us, for out-of-town investors." He slid a flash drive across the table. "This has everything. Emails, blueprints, financials." Samantha copied it off Margaret's laptop while she was upstairs on a call. I stared at it. "Why now?" I asked. "Why give this to me?" "Because she called my daughter acceptable collateral. Said if our taxes went up, it was worth the price." His voice broke. "I don't care about the damn hot tub anymore. I just want to live in a neighborhood, not a real estate scam." He stood, then hesitated. "I should have spoken up sooner. I was just afraid. We all were." "You're not the first," I said quietly. "But you're here now. That counts." He nodded, jaw tight, and walked to the door. As he crossed the porch, he stopped and turned. "I'll testify if it comes to that." I watched him disappear into the dark. Inside, I plugged in the flash drive. And what I found, it would burn Ridge Hollow to the ground. I didn't sleep that night not because of anxiety, but because of purpose. I stayed up, sorting through the contents of Tyler's flash drive. It was worse than I imagined. There were emails between Margaret and her husband, James, detailing every move. Push rezone after pool proposal. Shift vote during Labor Day lull. No opposition expected Carl aging, passive. That one made me chuckle. Passive wasn't in my blood. Blueprints revealed the truth. 12 private cabins, a luxury spa, a members-only wellness center. All to be built across the southern ridge. My land was the crown jewel in a hidden resort plan. The community trail, the tennis court, the pool, all distractions. A front. By 6 a.m. Friday, I was in full motion. Coffee brewing, printer spitting out documents, highlighters flying. I compiled the emails, the permits, the zoning maps, even screenshots of the HOA website before they started deleting things. I didn't just want to fight. I wanted to end this. I called Jeanette from the State Historical Office. She answered with a voice full of energy. "Carl, I've been meaning to call. We're moving forward with a full field study. Your site's under full protection as of this morning. Nothing touches it." "Thank you," I said, nearly overwhelmed. "You have no idea what this means." "Oh, I think I do," she replied, and hung up with the warmth of someone who knew justice when she saw it. Later that morning, Edith showed up with her ancient laptop and a tote bag full of HOA newsletters from the last 30 years. She sat up at my dining table like it was a war room. "We're making a timeline," she declared. They buried everything in technical language and footnotes. "We're going to dig it all up." Hank came next, with a thermos of coffee and folding chairs. "If there's going to be a battle," he said, "we're gonna need reinforcements." By noon, my front porch looked like headquarters. Neighbors stopped by, curious at first, then stunned. One by one, I showed them the documents, the real plans, the profit charts, the signatures on hidden deals. Some were angry, others ashamed. A few nearly cried. Some had supported the HOA for years, believing in promises of improvements and community upgrades. They had no idea what was really happening behind closed doors. One older woman with silver hair and tears in her eyes whispered, "My late husband would have fought this too." By 5:00 p.m., the flyers came. Emergency HOA vote. Saturday, 7 a.m. Ridge Hollow Community Center. Motion, Special Authority Clause, board rights to disputed property. It was a last-minute power play. If passed, they could seize the land under the guise of community benefit. Bylaw Section 14.2. Edith pulled out her binder and flipped to the clause. Meant for things like sewage repairs or fire breaks. Not a land grab, she hissed. We spent the evening preparing like it was a court hearing. Tyler arrived just before dark, eyes shadowed but determined. I've been talking to folks, he said. They want answers. You'll get them, I promised. Saturday morning came cold and clear. Ridge Hollow's fall air had a bite that woke you up faster than caffeine. I wore my clean flannel and boots polished just enough to show I meant business. The community center parking lot was full by 6:30. People streamed in, many holding copies of the newsletter we'd handed out. There was tension in the air, tight, heavy. Friends exchanged wary looks. Families stood close. It felt like everyone knew something big was about to happen, even if they didn't know the full story yet. Inside, Margaret stood at the front, like a queen on a crumbling throne. Her red blazer was back. Her husband wasn't. She called the meeting to order at exactly 7:00. This session concerns community, integrity, and efficiency, she began, her voice crisp. Due to recent misinformation, we are forced to consider a motion granting the HOA emergency authority to manage disputed parcels. A low murmur moved through the room. Some nodded. Others looked confused. Before she could continue, I stood. Point of order, I said, holding up our copy of the bylaws. This meeting violates Article 9. Emergency sessions still require 48-hour notice. Edith backed me up. Filed under record. Violation noted. Margaret waved it off. The board determined the timeline was acceptable. You determined, I said, not the community. More murmurs. This time louder. Tyler stood. I moved to open the floor before any motion is called. A few voices seconded. Margaret looked around, cornered. Fine, she snapped. 5 minutes. I stepped forward. I won't need that long. I laid the documents on the front table. Maps, emails, financials, board communications. Everything you were told was a lie. This wasn't about a pool or a tennis court. This was about turning our neighborhood into a resort for out-of-town investors. Your board was ready to sell our land to the highest bidder. I turned to the crowd. Look at this permit. See who signed it. Look at the LLC. Look at the date. Right before they reclassified my land. Without telling you, without asking. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "It's true." I raised the final document, Jeanette's letter. This land is now under state protection. Legally. Historically. Permanently. They can't build anything. Not a flower bed. Not a fence post. And yet they still tried to force this vote. Margaret was pale. Edit. H stood beside me. I motion to remove Margaret Delaney from all board responsibilities pending ethics investigation. Seconded, Hank called out. All in favor? I asked. Hands went up, dozens of them. It was like a wave, slow at first, then unstoppable. Margaret looked around and realized it was over. She didn't say a word, just gathered her folder, turned, and walked out the side door. The motion passed. The vote was postponed. The board appointed Edith as interim president. Tyler volunteered to help rewrite the bylaws. Hank offered to oversee an independent audit. People lingered long after the meeting ended, sharing hugs, memories, and quiet apologies for not asking questions sooner. One woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. You didn't just save your land, Mr. Whitman. You saved all of us from becoming something we didn't recognize. I nodded, too full of emotion to answer. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. I looked toward the ridge. It was still mine, and always would be. I thought Margaret would go quietly. I should have known better. 3 days after the vote that removed her as HOA president, a black luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. The windows were tinted too dark to see through, but I recognized the license plate. Margaret hadn't even waited a full week. She stepped out alone this time. No clipboard, no blazer, just a black coat and her usual perfume lilacs, and something sharp underneath. "May I come in?" she asked. I didn't say yes. I just held the door open. She walked into my living room like she still owned the place, but I noticed the tension in her hands, the twitch in her mouth. This wasn't the Margaret from the boardroom. This was Margaret, in damage control. "I came to make you an offer," she said, settling into the armchair across from me. "I'm not selling. I'm not here to buy." That caught me off guard. She reached into her coat and pulled out a thick envelope. I didn't touch it. "That's a full settlement," she said. "From Hollow Creek Ventures. We'll withdraw all claims, terminate the development contract, and issue a public apology if you agree not to pursue legal action." I stared at the envelope like it was poison. "You want to walk away clean. I want this to end before it becomes a scandal that ruins more than just a neighborhood." I leaned forward. "You lied. You manipulated documents. You tried to take land that wasn't yours, and now you're worried about consequences?" Her eyes flashed, but she kept her voice level. "You won. You got what you wanted. Your land is protected." The board turned. "What more do you need?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the pasture. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the ridge in gold. The same ridge she tried to pave over. "It's not about what I need," I said. "It's about what's right." She didn't respond at first, just sat there, watching me. Finally, she said, "You know they'll come after me, professionally, maybe even legally. I know. And you're okay with that?" "No," I said quietly. "But you brought it on yourself." She stood, adjusting her coat. Her voice cracked just slightly. "We weren't always like this, you know. When James and I moved here, we thought we were building something good. Then the money got involved, and the pressure." I turned toward her. "That's the thing about power. You think it belongs to you until people remember who it really belongs to." She didn't argue. She just nodded once, turned, and left. I didn't open the envelope. I handed it straight to the county ethics office the next morning. Later that week, the story broke in the local press. A full spread photos of the artifacts, quotes from Edith, a timeline of the resort scheme. Margaret's name was front and center. So was mine. The fallout was swift. Margaret's husband resigned from 2 local boards. Hollow Creek Ventures issued a vague press release about leadership restructuring. The county commissioner opened a formal investigation into HOA financial activity. I didn't celebrate. I just stacked firewood and raked leaves. But things changed in the neighborhood. Subtle at first. People started waving again. Slower, warmer. Not the polite wave you give when you're pretending not to know someone, but real, honest recognition. I started getting visits, too. One neighbor brought over blueberry pie with a note, "Thank you." Another stopped me during a walk to say, "I thought we didn't have a voice anymore." You reminded us. We do. But the best moment came one evening as I sat on my porch, sipping coffee and watching the wind move through the trees. Tyler and Samantha Morgan walked up with their daughter, Ella. She was carrying a shoebox. "We wanted to give you this," Samantha said, "for everything you did." Inside were photographs of the artifacts, of the original boundary markers, of Edith and me standing at the ridge. "We printed extras," Tyler said, "so no one ever forgets." Ella handed me a drawing crayon lines of the pasture, with a tree and a little house, and the words "Mr. Carl's land" scrawled across the top. I swallowed hard. I asked if they wanted to stay for dinner. They did. We sat on the porch, plates in laps, talking like neighbors used to. About Old Ridge Hollow, about what could have happened, and what almost did. After they left, I placed the drawing next to the arrowhead on my mantle. The past had been threatened, but the future? It was finally safe. 2 weeks after Margaret's visit, I found myself standing in front of the county courthouse, holding a manila folder that weighed more than it should. Not physically, just in meaning. Inside was everything. Copies of emails from the flash drive, zoning maps, forged meeting minutes, and the deed to my land, with my grandfather's signature still visible beneath decades of ink and weather. The county had opened a formal hearing on the Ridge Hollow HOA. What started as a neighborhood dispute had grown into a county-wide scandal, and now they wanted testimony under oath. I wasn't alone. Edith came with me, dressed like it was Sunday service. Hank sat 2 rows behind me in the courtroom, arms folded, eyes locked on every board member called to speak. Tyler Morgan was the first witness. He confirmed everything he'd told me that night in my kitchen about the flash drive, about the overheard conversation between Margaret and her husband, about the vacation rental scheme. Then they called me. I stood, swore to tell the truth, and took the seat at the front of the room. At first, the questioning was straightforward. How long had I lived in Ridge Hollow? When did I first learn about the rezoning? What steps had I taken to contest the HOA's claim? Then the tone shifted. A county attorney pulled out one of the maps. Mr. Whitman, is it true that you found this survey marker yourself? Yes. Do you have qualifications in land surveying? No, but I had a retired surveyor with me, Hank Sellers. 30 years with the state. They nodded, checked something off a clipboard, and moved on. I answered everything honestly about the late-night research, the historical preservation forms, the anonymous tip to the state office. I didn't hide the fact that I had help, that this was bigger than me. When I mentioned the artifacts, there was a murmur in the room. One of the council members asked if I had them with me. No, I said. They're with the state now. Being studied, another asked. And you believe this entire development was intentionally hidden from the community? I looked around the room. I don't believe it. I know it. And I brought the proof. I handed over the flash drive. It had been duplicated, encrypted, verified. The contents were undeniable. Emails detailing timelines for acquiring land before residents caught wind. Strategies for manipulating votes by timing notices during holidays. One message from Margaret's husband even read, "Carl Whitman is going to be the only obstacle. He's old. He'll wear out." I smiled a little when they read that part aloud. Margaret's attorney objected. "Relevance," he said. "These are private communications taken without consent." The judge overruled him. The whistleblower protections apply, and the content is directly relevant to the case. After 2 hours on the stand, I was excused. As I stepped down, I glanced toward the crowd. There were more people than I expected: neighbors, local reporters, even students from the high school civics class. Many nodded at me. Some even clapped quietly, despite the judge's warning. The next day, a letter arrived from the state attorney general's office. They'd picked up the case. Potential civil violations, possibly criminal ones too. Margaret's lawyer issued a statement to the press. My client acted in the best interest of the community and denies all allegations of wrongdoing. But fewer people were buying that now. Even the local news anchor, a man I'd watched for 20 years, closed the story by saying, "If not for one man's persistence, Ridge Hollow would be a resort by now." Instead, it remains what it always was, a home. I stood in my kitchen, that quote echoing in my head as I brewed coffee. A home. That word meant more now than it ever had. I walked out to the pasture, now marked with protective signs from the historical office. The wind felt different, lighter. Then I saw something near the oak tree, a small circle of stones. At the center, a plaque, wooden, hand-carved. For the ones who stood their ground, no name. But I knew who put it there, and who it was for. I sat on the bench nearby and let the quiet wrap around me. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and far off, I could hear the distant sound of kids laughing somewhere down the road. Real life, had returned to Ridge Hollow. A woman walked by with her dog and waved. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," she called. "For what?" "For reminding us we still have a voice." I gave her a smile and nodded. The fight wasn't over yet. Investigations would take time, and I knew Margaret still had lawyers. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could exhale. I wasn't just holding on to land. I was holding on to truth. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing a man can do. Fall came slowly to Ridge Hollow that year. The trees turned gold one leaf at a time, like they were reluctant to let go of the summer. I knew the feeling. The lawsuits dragged on through September. Depositions, subpoenas. Margaret's lawyer tried every trick in the book, stalling, dismissals, counterclaims, but the truth had momentum. Every time they tried to bury it, more of it came to light. By October, 3 more HOA board members had resigned. A new interim president had been appointed. Someone practical, someone honest. I wasn't called back to court. My part was done. The county and the state had everything they needed, so I went back to living. I fixed the old fence near the creek, repainted the barn trim, and helped Edith organize her historical records into labeled boxes. She was planning to donate them to the town library, said it was time the stories belonged to everyone. Sometimes I'd walk the pasture with Hank and talk about the survey markers, like we were retracing a map drawn from memory and dirt. We'd laugh about how close we'd come to losing it all, but most days I just sat on the porch. The land felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because everything had. One afternoon in late October, a letter arrived. This one wasn't a summons or a threat. It was from the State Historical Office. The site had been officially designated a cultural heritage area. The land would be protected in perpetuity. No development, no digging, no more fights. I held the letter in both hands and read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box my father had left me, the same box that once held the map that saved this land. That evening, I invited Tyler and Samantha and little Ella over for dinner. Edith came too, along with Hank. We grilled burgers, drank lemonade, and listened to Ella tell us about her school project on local history. I told my teacher that Ridge Hollow is special, she said proudly, because it has heroes in it. We all smiled at that. After they left, I stayed outside long after the stars came out. Crickets sang in the brush, and the breeze carried the smell of earth and wood smoke. I thought about my grandfather's hands planting fence posts, my father's voice calling me in from the creek, my wife's laugh on summer nights like this. People talk about land like it's property, but it's more than that. It's memory, it's legacy, it's the ground we rise from and return to. A few days later, I received a phone call from the county. They wanted to honor me at the annual Founders Day ceremony. Said they were renaming the Southern Ridge Trail in my name. I tried to decline, but the woman laughed and said, "You earned this, Mr. Whitman, whether you want it or not." So I showed up, wore my good boots and clean flannel. The mayor gave a speech. Edith read a poem. And when they unveiled the new wooden sign, Whitman Ridge Trail, I didn't say much, just nodded, tipped my hat, and let the crowd have the moment. Later, I walked the trail alone. It wound through the trees, past Dad's tree and the old stone circle. I stopped at the plaque, for the ones who stood their ground, and ran my fingers across the letters. I thought about the next generation, about what they'd inherit, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't worried, because now they knew what it meant to fight for something that matters. And they'd seen someone do it with their own eyes. I took a seat on the bench nearby, pulled my thermos from my coat pocket, and poured a bit of coffee. It steamed in the cool air, and I watched it drift upward like smoke from a campfire. Maybe someday, a young couple will walk this trail and wonder who Whitman was. Maybe they'll read about what happened here, or ask their grandparents, or see Ella's school project hanging in the library. And maybe, just maybe, they'll feel braver because of it. Because sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "No, not this time," and meaning it. This story may have started with a fence line and a letter, but what it uncovered was something much deeper about community, memory, and the quiet strength of standing your ground. What I learned through all this is that legacy isn't just about what we leave behind in a will. It's about what we protect while we're here, whether it's land, values, or truth. Some things are worth holding on to no matter the cost. I also learned that silence is its own kind of surrender. If good people don't speak up, bad plans go unchallenged. It doesn't matter if you're 35 or 75, your voice still matters. I hope this story reminds you that it's never too late to stand up for what's right. You don't need a title or a badge. You just need the courage to say, "This matters to me," and the patience to keep showing up, even when others walk away. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your chest, or reminded you of who we are, when we're at our best, please consider hitting that like button. Share it with someone who might need encouragement today. And if you want more stories like this, stories with heart, heritage, and purpose, go ahead and subscribe. We're not just sharing content, we're preserving values that matter. And I hope you'll stand with me every step of the way.